And it's been a real joy to get to be with them and get to meet their families and learn their eating patterns. Bradley's got a boy named David. Is that right? Is it David? Is an eating machine. He's the littlest kid in the family, but man, he can put away some food. And we had a good time last night, and just a great time. And it's an honor to get to have you all with us. I appreciate y'all taking time out of your schedule. I know you were just in Cuba less than 72 hours ago, and me and John put this thing together pretty fast, and I appreciate you getting able to be here with us. So it's an honor, and we're going to ask y'all some questions. And I guess for the church to get to know you all a little bit better, we'll start with you, Bradley, on the question. I know we talked yesterday about you pastoring a church. You were at PCC. You were graduating about the time that I got there. But you went from there to pastoring a church. How did God work in your heart to go from being a pastor of a church to where actually missions was on your heart?
So we lived in a very rural community outside of Montgomery, Alabama called Union Springs. I'm originally from Alabama. I moved my wife, who was born and raised in Boston, Massachusetts.
Oh, wow.
She could not wait to get further south. She just wanted to get to the heart of the Southland. And we got down there, and we were in a very small community. And to make a long story short, my wife is bilingual. We lived in a community that was about 80% African American. It was about 15% Latino and 5% Caucasian. And when we got there, most of the Latino population became her patients at her clinic. And the owner of the hospital came to us one day and said, "Hey, if I pay for y'all to go, would y'all go with a medical team out of Montgomery down to the jungles of Peru?" And so we jumped on it. We had always prayed that God would allow us to be involved in missions. We just didn't know how it was going to work. And so we went on that very first trip. And got there, and God just began to work on our heart. We're seeing hundreds of people stand in line. It was our first exposure to medicine outside the U.S. and the dire needs. And there's just hundreds of people standing in line. I looked at her, I said, "Man, if I was a missionary or pastor, I'd come down here every day. It's like shooting fish in a barrel. They're not going to walk away. You can share the gospel, give them a bottle of water, invite them to church." And there was a local church there that was trying to evangelize the people. And at the end of the week, I remember we were getting on the plane, and God had just really crushed our heart for what we had seen. And I told her, I said, "Do you want to get off the plane?" She was crying. I'm crying. I said, "Let's get off the plane. We're debt-free. We have no kids. We'll get off the plane. You'll start a clinic. I can start a church, and let's just stay here and do this." And, of course, that was kind of crazy, and I think that made her cry even more. She was terrified. But we came home. The owner of the hospital paid for us the second year to go to Ecuador, do the same thing. And, again, God just really was just working in our heart. And I began asking questions. How did you get the medicine in the country? How did you do this? I love logistics. I love figuring out things. And by the third year, he came to us and wanted us to go on another trip. And I said, "Thank you so much." I said, "But God has worked in our hearts so much. We've called friends, and we've got about 28 medical professionals and some students. We're going to help a friend of mine that planted a church. We really strongly believe you really shouldn't try to separate your skills from your faith. And we believe we can do both of these things together and lead people to Christ and work with the church." And we went on that first trip, and we saw a little over 3,000 patients come through our clinic. We saw hundreds of people come to know Christ. And when we came home, we both resigned our positions, and we just knew God called us into this. We didn't know what we were doing, but we launched Medical Missions Outreach. That's been 20 years ago.
Wow.
This coming March, 20 years ago, God allowed us to do that.
Wow. Isn't that great? That's great. TJ, on the same, you were a missionary in Jamaica, which, you know, it sounds like you were really suffering for Jesus over there, you know. It's like, I'll be a missionary to Hawaii. That's where I'm going to go, you know. All the pineapple you can eat, but I'm sure there are setbacks to it and serving the Lord there. How did you transition from serving the people there in Jamaica to actually having a heart to start core ministries?
Yeah, sure. So the dynamic of our ministry was a church planting ministry in Kingston, Jamaica. Definitely different than what you see on the commercials, but it was still a beautiful country. We love the country, we love the people. Chris and I went with 0 children.
Wow.
We had both our kids when we got there. We got married in June. In July, we were traveling on deputation.
Wow.
And the next January, we were on the field. So really not the best, path for a newly married couple, but we learned as adults, or becoming adults on the field together, and learning how to become married, and then learning how to do ministry. And we just did what we were told to do, and that was start a church. And we started the church. I remember we started in our living room, and then, just from the next place to the storefront to the hotel to get a building. And it seemed as though every time our ministry got really going, I became uncomfortable. And so I never left that church, but we would start another church. So we go to a different part of Kingston, start another church. We ended up doing that 3 times. I said, well, at some point, I got to start turning something over. And I was really learning ministry kind of as I was doing it. And so we had a man that had been reached to our ministry. We saw him and his then at the time girlfriend get married. They were baptized and just really serving in the church. And his name was Stan, and I said, Stan, I need you to step up in the church. He had worked as a DJ, he had worked as a bus driver. He was at the time he was working for the church. He was a bodybuilder, and I said, man, I need you to step into the role of the pastorate of this church. And I said, I'm going to step away and look at other church planting, because the Lord was moving in my heart to just continue starting the church. I realized that uncomfortable feeling I was feeling when things were going well, it was just time to move on. I didn't realize at the time it was more the missionary spirit as opposed to the pastoral role that I was filling. I remember the first Sunday I put him in place, if you will, and he preached the first service, and I was kind of there. Generally after church, people would come to see me and shake my hand, or whatever. And I remember we had one air conditioning unit in our entire church, which is very vital in Kingston, Jamaica. And I would go to my office and I would sit there, try to cool down. And I remember I walked out of the office expecting to see people like I had been for years, and nobody was there. And I thought, man, what is going on here? And I looked across the building, and people after people were just coming and seeing Pastor Stan, and were talking with him. And at first, I got frustrated. I was like, man, I'm still the pastor of the church, and just had an American spirit in me and the personality. But then I sat there and I looked at it and I thought, well, maybe that's what's supposed to happen. And the truth of the matter is that it's a shame for me to even say it now after living there at the time, 5 or 6 years, not realizing that that's what the DNA of the Great Commission was. So the Lord said, you just need to just turn it over to him. And so I started studying and looking at scripture, and I started realizing. So I started analyzing what it would take for Stan to, he was working 2 8-hour shifts a day, driving buses all throughout Kingston. And I asked him one day, I said, Stan, how much do you make? And he says, I make $500 a month. He's working 16 hours a day, 5 days a week, $500 a month. And I said, if I paid you $500, could you leave that bus job and pastor the church? He said, well, of course I could. So I made that commitment to him, but then I thought, well, wait a second, what am I doing living off so much more than what this pastor is living off of? And then I started looking at the relational impact he was having with the people. Mm-hmm. It went from people coming to church because I was an American, I was a foreigner, to now they were coming to church because one of their men was pastoring. They went from, hey, there's a foreigner there who I didn't know there. I mean, I love them. I love their culture. I loved everything about them, but I didn't grow up like them. I didn't grow up in their heartaches. And to a guy who had been through every step of life that they went through. And so I really stepped out and I said, Krista, if we can support him, and maybe we can do this somewhere else. And so the Lord initially was, let's just sponsor this one pastor. I started talking to another missionary in Africa, and I said, man, this is what I'm kind of going through right now. I just want to support him. And it was that stepping away to see if I could effectively help him, how much more effective can I be? And really the initial step was, let's help this one pastor in Jamaica, the one pastor in Ghana that we knew, and one pastor in the Philippines. And we were going to live in Kingston. And as we started the ministry, the dynamic of it, we just saw the ministry continue to grow and develop. But what the key was, it was knowing what, as an American, in my life, what my role and mission was to essentially get in, get the thing started, and then get out of the way. And then we saw around the world where missionaries would struggle from culture to climate to food to language. The nationals obviously don't have any of that issue. And so just to see how effective they could be on what turned out to be the average in a village of what 3% of what an American needs to live in that country, the national is serving. And so we just thought, I just made a statement. I'm not speaking for any other missionary, but in my life, I said, Krista, I am not so valuable that I'm going to take all of this for us to live here. So we're not going to do that. Mm-hmm. And that's how we stepped out. And then the Lord led us to Pinecrest, to where it just kept growing to what we're doing.
So how many pastors do you have under your ministry that are being supported like that?
Yes, sir. So we're just right at 320 since we started. Currently, we're on our website. I think there's 135. And the reason that number is different is because our goal and our desire is for the pastors to become self-supported to where they don't need our support. So we support them with the direct intention to teach their people to give. And so over the 10 years, 320 or whatever, 330, but as a pastor becomes self-supported, we take them off of our website. And so that number grows overall, but on our website, it's growing slowly because pastors are dropping off. So right this second, it's 135. We have 6 applications from Cuba we just took, so we'll push it right at 140. But this year alone, we'll drop 10 or 15 pastors who have become self-supported. And then what we do is we contact the sponsor and say, hey, your pastor is self-supported. What would you like to do? And 9 times out of 10, they just reinvest that into the next pastor. Wonderful.
So I don't know if y'all catch that, but the effectiveness of that, and maybe you both could speak into this, an American missionary, John, maybe you can say something about this, is, they go on deputation. What is an average goal to raise monthly before they go on the mission field?
It depends on where they're going. Europe, probably anywhere from 7,500 to 10,000. If it's different parts of Africa, 5 to 7 maybe. It just depends on where they're going.
So an American has to raise, let's say, $7,000 a month to take care of his family, the needs of the ministry, versus what God laid on your heart is finding these national pastors who don't have to go on deputation. They don't have to learn how to speak the language. And it's a way quicker process and more effective, right?
Yes, sir. And then we raise that support for them. So like pastors in Cuba, I was just there, like you'd mentioned, they were getting between 150 to 250. And that is, it's not 150 from your church and the next church and the next church. When we're able to support them, they don't have to worry about anything. And in Cuba, because of the economic structure, they're actually feeding everyone in their community with that. They're able to really the black market, but go buy extra food and feed them. And so definitely at a lot more effective rate. Now, I do want to be very clear, and I think we would all understand this. There is a place for the American missionary to go. Right. There's unquestionably. But there's so many national pastors. I believe if we don't get behind, and this is work coincide with Bradley's doing, working with pastors and with his medical clinics, but if we're not going to come alongside the nationals, then why are we sending missionaries?
Right.
Because the national is the product of what you're supporting missionaries to do. So we just come along, help fulfill that great commission.
That's wonderful. Ain't that great? Both of y'all can jump into this if you want, but here's the first question. Me and John will jump back and forth here, but what do you all see as the biggest barrier to seeing missionaries surrender to go to the field?
I might not make friends if I say my answer.
Okay, go ahead.
I think the reality is it's really honestly a lack of faith sometimes. Yeah. I think whenever people, so our ministry right now, we're praying for God to add 30 full-time missionaries to our ministry within the next 3 years. And I've been having conversation after conversation after conversation with medical professionals, people that they know God is working in their heart, that God has just really been burdening them. And the conversations are inevitably about, yes, I know I can do this. I know I have the skills for this. I know that God's placed a calling on my life. But when it comes to that financial part of it, man, that's when the air just gets sucked out of the room. Mm-hmm. I think people have this idea that missionaries are just a bunch of moochinaries. All they're doing is just going from church to church, give me money, give me money, give me money. And people look at it as, well, I'm not a beggar and I don't want to do that. I could never ask somebody for money. And the reality is, I don't look at it that way at all. I'm not asking for people for money. This is not about me. I'm trying to help you do what you were called to do, just like I was called to do. This is a partnership. I tell people all the time, this is not my ministry. This is our ministry, because I can't do it without y'all. And y'all need missionaries like us to go to the places that you're not called to. And it's a partnership. That's what it's really all about. Yeah. And I think really when it boils down to it, you have people who maybe they're afraid to leave a comfort zone. They're afraid to lose the security of that paycheck that they've been getting. And for us, maybe it's that hospital or that clinic setting that they've been working in, leaving that to do something outside of that security that they felt for so long. And again, it sounds really harsh, but I mean, when you really boil it down, it's really saying, man, I just lack the faith to believe that God would supply, that God will bring the partners along, that God will open the doors for me, that he'll keep my family safe and provide for us along this way. And so I think that's probably for us what I've been seeing, especially probably in the last 5 years of we've been praying for God to do more and bring more people. That continuously seems to be the barrier of why we're not seeing more people join.
Yeah, the Bible talks about the laborers are few. I'll be honest, in my ministry and around the country, I don't see a large harvest or even an emphasis of missionaries going to the field like I feel like I did at one time. Is that something that all of you are seeing?
Yeah, I was just going to add that to what Bradley was saying. When we were, I'm assuming coming through Bible college and younger, man, missions was always pushed, and so many missionaries were going, and we were hearing about the great missionaries. And I'm not in the pulpit here in America, so I don't know what's being pushed, on a day-to-day basis. But I think part of that is the path isn't always clear. Back 20, 30 years ago, or 20 years ago when I started working with missions, you just go on invitation, you go, and there wasn't really a lot financially in America to offer, especially, truthfully, in the church culture. There wasn't like, well, I want to stay back because look at what the pastor is doing. It's, man, I want to serve alongside my pastor, and I'm very careful as I say this, and if it comes across wrong, Bradley told me to say it, but the American, and I'm not saying this critically because I'm an American, I love it, and I part of it, the American consumerism, and even within ministry, I think can hinder the tenderness to go serve.
Yeah.
And the reality of it is, until we get people overseas and get excited about it, they're not going to have the calling to do it.
Right.
You mentioned this morning, or Pastor mentioned this morning, mine eye affected my heart. Well, we're not affected because our eyes don't see it.
Yeah.
And churches like you're doing right now just have to put it in front of people and make it a desirable thing. Bradley believes it, lives it, his team, myself, my family, my team. There is nothing we'd rather do than to be overseas serving.
Yeah.
But it's a calling that we have on our life.
Right. Yeah. The mine eye affecteth my heart, and that's one of the biggest reasons we want. It's not God's will for everybody to go to the mission field, but it is God's will for all of us to be involved in some way. After Becky lost Cashton, Miss Connie and Mindy and a bunch of people were going to Haiti, and to be honest, I would have never dreamed in a million years that my Becky would have went to Haiti. I literally stayed in a tent. How hot was it over there? Very hot. Lived on Slim Jims for 10 days. But I'll never forget her coming home, and we would go to Applebee's, and she would feel guilty for spending $15 on an Applebee's meal because she's like, I could literally feed all of those kids for 2 weeks on what we buy this. And I watched Becky's whole countenance change. And when we would pray at night, I'll never forget those days where Becky, to be honest, before that, I would lead in prayer and she would silent prayer, right? But Becky would pray out loud and she would call those kids by name. And she'd say, Lord, please don't let them starve to death. Lord, call them by name. And to watch the change that happens in some of mine eye affected mine heart. And so that's one of the biggest reasons, not because we want you to go over there and just say, well, you're going to be a missionary. No, but I think we even become more productive where we are when we see how blessed we are and more cognizant of the need across the ocean, right? John?
I have the privilege to be around these guys a lot because their families are at our church, and I know they travel a good bit. And so what I mean by that is I get to hear a lot of the stories of how God is using core missions and how God is using medical missions outreach. And I'm a big fan of a story. I think when you can connect to something God has done that only God could do, that just inspires me. It stirs my heart. And I wonder if both of you could just share maybe a story from the last 12, 15 months of just something God did that was obvious God had to do that. That was just a victory, and how he used your ministry over the last 15, 16 months or whatever it is.
Well, I mean, goodness, I feel like I could tell you a bunch of stories. We've seen God do some absolutely amazing things. We have an 8,000 square foot surgical center in Central America. We have 2 OR theaters there where we do orthopedic general surgery. We do podiatry, GYN, and Lord willing, we're praying to start cataract and pterygium surgeries very soon. But this surgical center in Central America, they can travel freely without a passport or visa amongst Central American countries. And we built it in a strategic location where other churches, other ministries can send people to our surgical center for care. And we have had so many incredible stories. One of the local public hospital, there's one public hospital for 400,000 people. So you can only imagine especially if you're in the healthcare industry, 400,000 people depending on one hospital in an underdeveloped country that's very rarely ever fully staffed or stocked. They have not had anesthesia in this hospital for over 8 months at this point. So we work with their social worker. Our person on our staff in Honduras works with their social worker. We find the cases that are probably not going to receive care because they either can't fund it or they just don't have the supplies to do that surgical procedure, and we do those surgeries. And so just a few months ago, we had a general surgical team that was going down. We were going to do some hernias, gallbladders, lumps and bumps, some different things like that. And one of the patients that came in had been waiting for surgery. I believe, Kelly can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe they've been waiting over 5 years to have a hernia surgery. So you can only imagine the discomfort. And it's a blue-collar society. And I forget what this person did, but they had a blue-collar job. They've been living with this. They've been told they only had one or two hernias. I think by the time our surgeon got in, there was close to 10 hernias that we ended up fixing. But this patient, one of the most beautiful things, it was kind of funny, they got there and they just couldn't, first of all, they couldn't believe how beautiful the place was. God's been good. He gave us a really beautiful building. We want to treat them with dignity and respect. When we brought them in and we put on the no-slip socks and we gave them the gown to put on, and we put them in this really nice, it's just a normal hospital bed like you would have if you went right down here to Piedmont. We put them in that nice bed. It had a blanket and it had everything for them. And they just couldn't believe it. They just kept saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. And just, their eyes were big, and our staff took care of them. We did the surgery. When we were discharging them, we walked back in the room to find they had taken the gown and folded it all nice and neat, had put it there. And the gratitude, the church that we work with there would end up going back to the home to do a post-surgical follow-up. Make sure they're doing okay. They'd already come back. We'd done incision site follow-up, all that kind of stuff. But this was more on the spiritual side. And for that person, they just broke down in tears. They just said, it's as if you're invisible here until I was with you and I was seen. And I felt so loved and accepted. And that person from the church began to tell them how loved they are by God and why we do this. We've been loved so much that we can't help but love other people, and began to share the gospel. And for that lady to bow her head and trust Christ, I'm telling you, it just makes all the difference in the world when you can look at a person in the eyes and tell them, man, this is because Jesus loves you. It's worth all the effort in the world. And we're just seeing stories. I mean, I could tell you dozens of them, of God changing lives. And now that same church, we go back and we're seeing people now sitting in the congregation. We actually have a man that guards the gate, and he'll come in sometimes for counseling. He was a patient, I think 12 years ago, who came into our clinic, big, long ponytail. He was an alcoholic, drug addict, had all kind of life issues, and ended up visiting the church after that medical clinic, trusting Christ, and he's about to become the pastor of the church pretty soon. And it's amazing what God is doing.
Great?
Yeah.
I thought the numbers were daunting too. I think you said 4,000 some people. That's amazing. And so that's great. TJ?
So we work in 24 countries currently. About 3 years ago, I was in the villages of East Honduras, kind of staying in Central America. We were pastors in, again, really remote areas. Well, I had come across a pretty decent-sized property that I'd heard about missionaries. Had a Bible college there, had a medical clinic, several different things. But I heard the missionaries left. And so me and one of the guys I work with, we ended up kind of going to the property and looking through some information, trying to find out who owned that property. We found a picture on the wall of a missionary who had a logo. We Googled the logo. And long story short, the Lord gave us 72 acres in eastern Honduras. And the ministry who's Tupelo, Mississippi said, you can have it. You just got to perpetuate the ministry. And I said, well, if you give it to us, we'll start a Bible college there, and we'll just use that as a location, which we call base camp now, to just reach those villages. And eastern Honduras is cut off from the rest of the country. You can't drive there. You got to take a boat or an airplane to a dirt runway. They don't speak Spanish, or indigenous language is Mosquito. So we're out there, and Pastor John went with us. It was October a couple years ago, or sometime a couple years ago, and him and some other men in our ministry said, let's just go pray about it. I remember we went to the property, and we prayed over it, and I really felt, I don't know if I've told you this, I really felt the Lord telling me, yeah, this is not what you're supposed to do. So we go to the hotel, we sit down, and I said, guys, what do you think? And Pastor John's like, man, you got to do this. I was like, okay. And then
He's done that to me.
Yeah. And then another guy in the ministry was like, man, he's like, there are so many opportunities here, you have to do it. And I thought, well, Lord, I brought these men down for their counsel. And so I met with our team of immediate leaders, and I said, we'll take on this responsibility, but God's going to have to open every single door, every single opportunity. And we've seen so many things happen. But up until very recently, I think it was October of this last year, we were with 16 men from Pinecrest. And the goal was to go in. We were done a lot of construction, got it ready for groups. We were staying on the property, and we had some dormitories there that were just complete in disarray. And so they came in, built bunk beds. We worked on the water system. They're just knocking everything out. But every evening we would go to a village. And by this point, at that time, we were supporting 4 pastors in villages. We were told there's about 80 villages within a 2-mile boat ride of our property. And just there's streams and canals. And so we had started one by one going to the next village. And we supported a pastor in a village called Townsend. And it was late one night, or it was about 4 o'clock. It gets dark, pitch dark at 5. And I said, guys, if we're going to go to the village, we're going to show a Christian film, get people together and preach to them. I said, if we're going to go, we need to leave right now. It had been raining all week long. So we hired a truck. He came, and the truck got stuck. The doors couldn't open on the truck. He got stuck in the mud. And so we have a little motorcycle that's got a bed on the back, and we put a couple benches back there. And so I told 4 of the guys on the team, I said, listen, just jump in the motorcycle with me. We're going to go to the village, and we're just going to see what we can do. I thought I'd been to this village before, but I'd been by boat, but I'd never been by motorcycle. So we finally get to the village, and I pull up to the church. I asked for the pastor who we support. Pastor came out, and it wasn't the pastor we supported. I thought, well, maybe he looks different, under the different lighting or something. And we didn't have a translator with us. Again, no one spoke. We speak Spanish a little bit, but they don't speak Spanish. So I told, there's kids playing soccer over here. I told 2 of the guys, I said, hey, just jump out and play soccer. I told another guy who works for the FAA, he's not the most outgoing person in the world. I said, Brian, I need you to stay here and set this up and just start manning this. I said, I got to go get some more people. So I go a half hour back to the property, get 5 more guys. I come back, pitch dark. Long story short, man, there was 150 people that were watching this Christian film. And the whole time I'm like, man, something doesn't seem right. Something's not right. Well, we didn't have any reception. So I went to the edge of the village rather. And Nate Beal, our missionary in Honduras, was messaging me, blowing up my phone. He's like, man, where are you guys? The pastor's waiting on you. And I'm like, oh man, we may have a problem here. Yeah. And I'm like, Nate, I'm at the village. He's like, you're not. He was back with the truck. He's like, I'm telling you, you're not there. It started to rain, and the local village people, if you will, opened the church and just said, hey, just come in the church. And so, man, this church was packed out. And Luke Hamilton, a staff member at the church, he just preached the gospel. By that time, I picked up a translator, had the translator come in, and we saw people after people trust Christ. We were able to recently before purchase Bibles that Pinecrest helped us with, get them down there. We're to start passing out Bibles. And man, it was such an exciting thing to see. And the whole time I'm like, man, something's not right.
Yeah.
We finally get back. Of course, now we literally had 10 people on the back of the bike, and it was a little ridiculous. And we won't do that to your group, though. I'm going to tell you right now. I'm going to tell you, that was just a one-time thing. All right?
Yeah.
It's not. But we get back to the property, and by the time we got back, is about 9 o'clock at night. They finally got the truck, and I just told everyone else, stay at the house. And come to find out, where we end up going was a completely wrong village. And at first, I'm like, well, stink, man. We messed up. But then I thought, wait a second. We literally just rolled into a village. They didn't know we were coming. They had no connection to us whatsoever. The pastor he saw us, and without even being able to communicate, he just opened up his church for us. But here's what happened. Men in our church were affected that night, and they're still talking about it. The gospel was preached. People were saved. And then the next night, we were able to go to the right village and do it all over again. Yeah. But that just showed us, you know what? Even when we make mistakes, God's like, I had you exactly where I needed you. That was pretty exciting.
I love that. Did you say that they spoke in Mosquito?
Yes, sir. Their language is Mosquito.
Y'all know how to speak Mosquito. Yeah, in the South, we know. Yeah, I never knew there was a language. Yes, that was pretty interesting. So one of the questions we have is, yes, we're trying to raise Faith Promise Missions, and we want to support missionaries and missions organizations like you all. But beyond that, and we talked about this at dinner a little bit last night, how can we help you all? And TJ, you start and just tell us as a church, outside of money, what we can do to help you.
So the DNA of our ministry is local church planting. And there's different dynamics to that, but the way that your church can get involved, one is obviously by prayer, and then giving to the local mission program so we can support more national pastors.
Right.
When money comes in, of course, we have a team and a staff that we're funding, that they raise their support like traditional missionaries. But when it's all said and done, we're trying to fund more missionaries. And we believe that an effective way to get those pastors funded is for people to go see it. And our mission trips range from construction trips. We've had churches go build bunk beds, they build houses, they build church buildings. They've had sports camps where they'll just take a soccer ball into the field. And when we do that, we're working with the local pastor, so they're getting a group together. Everything is similar to what Bradley does is centered around a local church. And so, how can your church get involved outside of the spiritual world of praying about it? Is just getting on the field and getting involved, and then personally connecting to a ministry somewhere, connecting to a pastor. We had a pastor from New York on Wednesday night of last week preaching a church in right outside of Havana, Cuba. We had a pastor from Illinois preaching in another church, or just on the other side of just on the other edge of Havana. And both of these men preach all the time, but when they got there, one preached in a little what would be a small group, a new church plant in the house, the next one in a bigger church. It broke their heart to see, not that they saw another church, but they knew how those people were living and how they were worshiping. And it was a Wednesday night, and a pastor from Illinois said, man, they were just happy to be there. And he pastors day in and day out in Illinois, but it was something different when he saw there's other people around the world with literally nothing, happy to worship.
Yeah.
To where we get, and so that's, I would say, just getting involved, seeing it, and then and ultimately partnering with pastors. But then I always encourage churches, when you partner with a pastor, go see him.
Yeah.
Go love on his family and see how your church can. And if we just speak plainly here, what a one-time offering could do from this church can dramatically change a church structure around the world. It can take care of a need that is unfathomable to them. Just one illustration of that. A small church plant, 3 years old in Tennessee, supports a church in Myanmar, a pastor in Myanmar. And they said, we want to be a blessing. He's saying he needs a motorcycle. Can we provide that? So in December of last year, they sent $1,400, purchased a motorcycle for this pastor and 1 year insurance. And that pastor sent me, we got a report back, picture with his bike. And he said, man, this is now revolution in my ministry, because now I can go to the village so much easier, and I can minister to other villages. And so what seemed so small to us dramatically changed it. But they're able to see it. Yeah. So that made a big part of it.
So to give context, what does it cost to build a church building in that part of the world somewhere?
So really, like in remote parts of Honduras, for about $5,000, you can build a wood structure. I think Pastor John, 2 years ago at your mission conference, it was $10,000, but we laid a concrete slab, a metal roof. We really made a really strong concrete structure. But for $5,000, what they'll do is they'll go out to the woods and harvest the wood themselves, plane it. And so what you're paying for is the day labor to do that, and then the transportation to bring it into town. So it's really not a lot of money. A lot of these villages, pastors come in from other villages. They take small canoes in. And so the limitations they have is not so much a church building necessarily, it's they don't have a house. And so we've gone in to help church pastors establish homes so they can then live in their communities. Yeah. And I'm not talking about they're up the river. I'm talking about they're 3 hours away. Yeah. If there's a storm or bad weather, they're not even getting to the church. So even building a small, and when I say a house, you're talking 400 square feet. They don't put kitchens in the house because it's all wood. And so you're just building a place for them to sleep. And then they live, I live there, and they're able to help their village.
Wow. That's great. So, brother, the question to you as well, we talked yesterday about the stuff you do in Atlanta with the optical stuff. Like, what can we as a church non-monetarily do to help your ministry?
Yeah, there's a lot. So as you can imagine, the amount of medications and supplies that it takes to do all of this. So we have our own pharmacy, we have our own wound care, we have our own laboratory, everything when we do all of these clinics overseas. So we go through a ton of supplies. So we have a program, this is a mouthful, it's called the Prep-A-Puppet program. So all of our pediatric patients get like a little felt hand puppet instead of a plastic bag with their medications. And we have a little card. You could even find one over on our table. It's got a list of over-the-counter medications that you can walk into Walgreens, Walmart. You can get it on Amazon, anywhere. And you can buy these and put it into a puppet. We'll send them to you. You can go online and find out how to do this. But you could collect medications like that for us so that we can get it overseas and get it into the hands of our patients. We have people who will come to Atlanta and volunteer. We need about 100,000 pair of glasses every year to have enough for all of the patients that will come into our clinic. So if you have that drawer at home where you've got all those, y'all know exactly what I'm talking about. Some of you folks out there wearing your glasses, you got a drawer at home with multiple pairs in there. You're being so greedy. I want you to bring those glasses. You could send those to us. We'll put them into our eyeglass recycle program. We clean them, tighten them, straighten them. We run them through a lensometer to get the exact prescription. We'll bag them. We'll put them in boxes. And we're going to give your glasses a new face. We're going to help people see clearly a need for Jesus. And we can use your glasses to do that. And it's a really neat program that you can do, you can be a part of. But you could even come down to Atlanta, come down to our offices there. You can spend the day helping us recycle glasses. You can help volunteer in the pharmacy as they pack and they do inventory for our trips and stuff. There's some really good hands-on stuff. And then, like I said, too, going on a trip, there's just nothing like going on a trip. Again, whether you're medical or non-medical, we have a job everybody can do. We can teach you very simple stuff. You can give a visual acuity exam. You know, can you read this line? Can you read this line? That's an easy job, and we'll teach you how to write the answers down so the next person takes the next piece of the puzzle. We can teach you how to fit glasses to people's faces. If you're not squeamish, you can work alongside a medical professional. You can help in our pharmacy. Our pharmacy fills about 12,000 prescriptions every 4 days of clinic, just helping get the medicines off the shelf so the pharmacist can fill it faster. I mean, there's just a ton of work to do. And you know what it's like? Many hands make light labor. And so we can see more patients when we all work together. And man, I could tell you some great stories about that too, of just having people come volunteer and be a part. I'd love to share with you how you can do that.
That's awesome.
This question is dear to my heart because your families are members at Pinecrest Baptist Church, and we sure love your families and we pray for you often. What specifically can we pray for your families about? Because a lot of times people see you guys, y'all are running hard, your wives, y'all run hard in ministry. You're home, you're gone, you travel a whole lot, and but y'all have kids. You've got a lot of things going. You're busy people. How can Victory Baptist Church pray for your family specifically, Bradley?
Well, man, that's a tough one. Pray for our family. We're in a new transition in our life. We have our first son just went to college. He decided to forego his senior year and go to a double, he gets to do both simultaneously on campus. I got another son that's going to be graduating in just a couple of months. A daughter who's going to end up doing the same thing and go one more year, and then she's headed to college. So this is a new transition for us. Pray for my wife and I as we just learn how to navigate this new period. It's definitely a big one for us. We love David. We're so grateful for David and how God has brought him to our family. Our family is just a unique blend of God's grace. That's all I can say. It's a beautiful tapestry that he is weaving right now. And just pray for us as we navigate that. We're praying for our kids to love the Lord and love the ministry. And not to look at it as something resentful because we have had to go so much and to go so hard. And we're just praying for God to keep us close, and not only to him, but to each other. That's really what we're praying for God to continue to do. So if you would pray for us that way, man, that would mean the world to us.
Amen.
Yeah, I think the answer's in the question. Just pray for the family. I think too often, sometimes when we get in ministry, the production is what gives us our satisfaction. And sometimes, especially in missions, that production looks like being away from home, preaching in churches. And so we're at a stage very recent in the last year or so where we've started allowing our children to stay home. They can drive, obviously, and so they're serving in ministry. We did that specifically in our children's case because, one, they don't like to travel, but two, they love their church. And I didn't, the desire, as Bradley said, not to let them resent the ministry. We wanted them to continue staying plugged in. And I think, but above all of that, and we all would agree, everyone in Saltorian would be for mine and Krista's relationship.
Yeah.
Man, if Satan can hurt our relationship, he can hurt. I mean, obviously, the ministry is not contingent on us, but it could hurt the ministry. We have a missionary in Honduras. At the time, he was in Chile, and there were some things just happening, and not with our families, but other families. And he called me, and he said, TJ, he says, and I never thought of it this way. He said, TJ, he said, protect your marriage. Mm-hmm. He says, because if something happens to you, what happens to me?
Right.
And I wanted to be like, well, what do I have to do with you? But then I realized it was not our ministry. It was a ministry that I worked with, that it was his lifeline to America and to the churches. And I thought, man, you know what? And so we kind of took a step back in traveling internationally. The Lord brought some amazing teammates who are doing a ton of our traveling for us. And so we try to at least once a year to be overseas with Krista and then Tommy and then Bella individually. And so, just to keep us tight and connected, but one way we have to do that is intentional planning. It's not easy. When you're in ministry, things just take your time and consume it. And so I would just say that pray that the Lord gives us wisdom to think of each other and make that a priority in our lives. And as Bradley, it's very similar, our older kids, or we only have two, but our kids are the same age as your older children, and life's changing. And some things just in the last year had dramatically changed in the life. And so very recently, I'm just sitting there, and I don't want to go into all the details, but I'm watching my son take this next stage. And literally, as he's taking this stage, like I was overcome with emotion because I had no control.
Yeah.
And the decisions he was making, and it would make more sense if I gave more detail, but the decisions he was making at that moment, I was like, God, he is in your hands. And I just was praying, Lord, if something happens to him, how am I going to handle that? And truthfully, I don't know how I would handle that. But I just asked, that's the prayer that, that dynamic of that family.
Yeah. Well, I'll ask one last question, then I'm going to take y'all and get some chips and some salsa. Do they do that in South America?
I don't think they do chips and salsa in Central America. No.
They should.
Yeah.
They should. So I'm a vision guy. I like to look out 5 years from now. That motivates me to go. So we'll start with you, Bradley. What's your vision? What's your goals? What's your dreams? Where would you like to see your missions go?
Goodness, y'all, you better call the Mexican restaurant and tell them to go ahead and hold on, because I got a lot.
Your microphone's going to turn off in about 3 minutes.
I'll make it really, really fast. Currently, we're offering about 20 trips a year. We want to see God add to our staff so that we can get to about 40 trips. Because we would be able to affect more churches, see more people come to know Christ. That's one phase of that, which includes having to have that extra staff to make that happen.
Right.
The second thing, probably our most marginalized patient population that we see are females. In most underdeveloped countries, they have a limited lack of access to care. They usually don't have the same rights, the same educational levels. And so we see them coming into our clinics with a lot of preventable, treatable issues, and education could be a big part of that. Also, we know, according to missiology, that a lot of times females are some of the first people to trust Christ in church plants. And so we believe that this is a great evangelistic opportunity. So we're praying for God to allow us to start building women's health clinics in conjunction with local churches around the world. So basically having a clinic right next door. We've got land in Tanzania. We've been offered land in South Africa. We're looking at some land in the Philippines, land in Guatemala, land in Haiti. We want to build it with that local church. So it's a ministry of that local church that our ministry can manage, bring the medical staffing there, but begin reaching into that community to some of the most vulnerable people. And so we're praying for God to bless we need the women's health practitioners that could join us. We need other volunteers to be a part of that. And of course, just all that would be involved to bring that to pass for those communities. So those are some quick, easy ones that I could tell you that God's calling us to do soon.
Awesome.
I think within our ministry, when we started, every pastor that we had worked with was associated with a missionary outside of our organization. And we're grateful to do that. About 5 years ago, the Beal family joined us, missionaries in Central America. And we saw the accountability that we have with the pastors now that we have a missionary sent from our organization, raise support through CORE. now is our missionary, if you will. The accountability and the responsibility is such greater there. It was far greater now that he was on the ground. And 2 years ago, we had a missionary join us who's a missionary to the Philippines. Now we have one, I think next Sunday, going back to Thailand. And we believe that the next step and the development of our ministry, continue with more pastors, more of the same, obviously, but to take that next step of accountability, not only on the monthly accountability, but also the training. And we believe that's going to happen not by more partnerships, which we're going to continue that, but by having more missionaries consider Core Missions their sending agency. We don't ask them to come join Pinecrest. Part of our responsibility as a sending agency is to connect them, have a better relationship with their sending church. But we've already seen through the countries that our missionaries are in now the more effective church planting. Nate Beal this morning was texting me earlier this morning. He was on a 3-hour hike to a village that he'd met a guy very recently who was pastoring up there. He has 3 feeding centers. I can go through all the details. And he was trying to show me videos of as he's on this hike, and he was showing me these different places. And he's like, man, there's this guy up here. He's doing this. But we would not know about him if we didn't have a guy on the ground.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see that. I had a Zoom call with a pastor in Laos through our missionary in Thailand. And we just believe that if we're going to continue supporting more pastors, one, we have to be involved on the training side, but then also have to be involved. We have to have a guy on the ground. And so we've never prayed for amount of countries or amount of pastors. We always just pray for more opportunities. But now we are praying that God brings us families who has a calling to move to a country to work specifically with us in the equipping of the pastors, the empowering of those pastors, so we can help them plant churches on a quicker basis.
Wonderful. Can y'all give these missionaries a hand and let them know we appreciate them being with us?